Last time I talked about layoffs, I was talking pretty broadly, but let's answer the question, why are companies laying people off, by getting specific. I'm going to go through several companies that over the last week have announced layoffs. I'm going to explain exactly what's going on inside of each one of those companies that's causing the layoffs. So you'll get a better idea just across the board. Why are these companies laying people off? Let's start with the giant, Amazon. Massive reduction in workforce. What is happening? They're getting rid of unprofitable business units. They're reducing wearables, headcount in their wearables, some of their robotics groups. Why? Because consumer discretionary spending is coming down. What is consumer discretionary spending? Well, people have to spend more money on groceries. They have to spend more money on gas. They don't have discretion over those items. You need food. You need to be able to transport yourself back and forth from work. But other things like wearable devices, those are getting less consumer spending. Why? Because customers don't have as much money. So they're not going to spend as much there. Amazon's looking at it from a strategic standpoint. They have to cut some of their long-term bets, and so they're looking at what will do badly over the course of this particular downturn. And that's why Amazon is laying so many people off from those concentrated units. Tencent just released some numbers about layoffs. They're doing really the same thing. They're going after streaming video, gaming, and their cloud division. And it's exactly the same story. They want to reduce the amount of money that they're spending on areas that are not growing, and they don't expect to grow anytime soon. It's a big trend. Stripe overhired. So Stripe announced some layoffs fairly recently. They didn't expect this slowdown. They thought they were going to continue to grow in the same way that they have for the last 2 to 5 years. So they hired in anticipation of that. They maybe even overhired for the demand that they had because they thought with the race for talent, if they didn't hire now, they may not get the opportunity to do it again. But reality has changed, and so now they're adjusting headcount so that the business size makes more sense. They're trying to save money that way. iFit, exactly the same thing. Pandemic. During the pandemic, everyone stayed inside, used fitness equipment. Now we've recovered. Everyone's getting outside. Less discretionary spend again, something very similar to what Amazon is seeing. So they cut their workforce significantly. But for them, it was a massive swing. They've gone from 2,500 employees at the beginning of the year to 1,300 now through a couple of rounds of layoffs. So for some companies, this is a minor adjustment. For other companies, this is a massive, massive shift. Cisco just announced layoffs. They were focusing on core business. If you're hearing a theme, this is going to be something that companies are going to say over and over again. Their core business is enterprise networking and security. They're going to accelerate their platform strategy. So they're not so much reducing costs as they are taking money away from business units that they don't think are going to be profitable anytime soon and putting it into other business units to make some areas of that core business growth move faster and to defend themselves from their competitors. You'll see this too. And in some cases, these layoffs aren't true layoffs because people will be given the opportunity to move from one business unit to another. So those companies are not such a big deal. Roku is doing very much the same thing. But again, if you look at the difference between Stripe and iFit, Roku is another one of those companies that's making much, much deeper cuts because the company as a whole just is not as viable or stable as something like a Cisco. CNN, outside of the tech world, they just went through a merger. There's a reduction coming in advertising spend, and there's significantly tougher competition from other news organizations, other streaming services for those same ad dollars. And so they will be reducing headcount because they simply don't have the same amount of money coming in, and they need to maintain viability as a business long-term through this downturn. FedEx, very similar story, slowing demand for freight shipping. This is the beginning of these secondary effects where one industry is impacted by slowdowns in spending, a reduction in budget. They don't ship as much, and so freight shipping. If you don't have as many customers, you don't need to ship to as many stores. You don't need to get as much to each one of your locations for manufacturing. There's a number of reasons why freight shipping would decrease in demand. And so FedEx is starting to offer voluntary furloughs to employees that they no longer need because the demand simply isn't there. Juniper Networks. So they're a networking company. So less advertising spend. This is another one of those network effects. Less marketing personnel because marketing folks are being impacted by these layoffs equals lower demand, lower revenues, and therefore they are cutting headcount again to maintain viability as a business. Disney Plus, they need efficiency because there's increased competition. Again, impacts on consumer discretionary spending on things like streaming services. And so they have to look for just some sort of offsets. They need to make their business more efficient. And so what they're doing is they're sending people to each and every team, each and every part of the organization in Disney Plus and figuring out who can be let go. How can we make this more efficient? These kind of cuts are dangerous. I'm going to talk about two more companies that are doing the same thing. They're dangerous because they could hit anyone. Anyone could be impacted by a layoff, even if they're part of a core business function, even if they are a critical employee. They may be laid off simply because the company needs to save money. Asana is doing the same thing. They're a workforce management software company. Now, think about it. If we are experiencing layoffs, HR and recruiting are another one, aside from marketers who are getting laid off at higher rates than other employees. We have a network effect on any sort of software company who supports, in this case, workforce management. So there's less demand. There is going to be less money coming in the door. People are going to be buying their products and software less. Therefore, they need to cut costs, and they're going to reduce headcount significantly. UiPath is another company. They're cutting to make their path to profitability. This is another trend that you'll hear very frequently. They just barely made a profit last quarter. And in order to stabilize and make sure that next quarter and the year to come, they continue to be profitable. Because remember, money is hard to get now. They can't borrow. They're not going to get additional investment from people. The only way to raise their stock price is to make it to profitability, to start returning revenue. And that's why they're cutting staff, because they're not able to increase revenue significantly. So instead, they're cutting the expense of running the business. And again, these cuts are going to be deep. When you get into multiple rounds of layoffs, they are painful because it is no longer about cutting out overhiring. It's no longer cutting out people who are no longer necessary in order to maintain service levels. You're now cutting people who the business really needs but just can't afford to keep on anymore. That means anyone that's remaining is going to be doing a significantly larger amount of work. Not quite to Twitter's extent, but you'll see your workload sometimes 20%, 25% higher than it used to be. You may be working an extra hour or two every day. The impacts, it doesn't sound significant, but if you're doing that for 6 months or 9 months in a row, it can grind on you. And so there will be sort of these losses in productivity soon in these companies because these layoffs really are demoralizing. You burn out your best employees and you have a lot of good people leave. So if you're in one of those situations, it's probably time to look for other options. Why so many right now? Is this a sign of a massive acceleration? For most companies, the reason why they're doing layoffs now is because their fiscal year, that means the year that they report, this is how much money we made this year, it ends on December 31st. And so if they take all the losses from layoffs, because layoffs actually cost companies a lot of money, if they write down those losses now, they start next year with a clean slate. The business costs less to run. They've already taken all of those big hits. And so next year is just naturally going to look a lot better compared to this year. And stock price will rise. Investors will be happy. That's why you're seeing this acceleration. Companies want to get this done and want to get this cost off their books before the end of the year. So this is not going to slow up very much. You'll see a little bit of a break for the holidays. Companies don't have enough people in the office to do massive layoffs during the holidays. So for Thanksgiving, you'll see a significant 1 week, maybe even 2 week break. Right after Christmas, all the way through the beginning of January, you're definitely going to see fewer layoffs happening. You usually pick up again in February or March is when you'll see the next big rounds of layoffs. But with something like this happening, companies who are in dire straits, companies that are in trouble, really financial trouble, they will lay off just consistently. Some big tech companies are shifting to a more traditional growth model. So companies like Netflix, Google, Apple, They used to be looked at as these massive high growth companies, but if you think about them, they're old companies. They have older product lines, fairly mature, and they're just not growing the same way that they used to. We think of them as industry innovators, but what's the last thing that's innovative that Netflix, Google, or Apple has come up with? You look at the iPhone, I think it's 15 years old. These are mature lines, mature products, and so they are shifting their business model. They're not hiring forever. They're not willing to invest money after money to try to grow. They're becoming more fiscally responsible. They're returning to traditional strategy approaches. So they are going to operate less like the tech companies that we're used to seeing them operate like, and more like these stable incumbent companies who have cost control, and the salaries are going to start coming down. Perks are going to start going away. They're going to act like the more traditional, bigger businesses that you're used to from a fundamental standpoint. I want to say if you're a high performer, the majority of these layoffs are not going to impact you. If you support core business, these impacts aren't something you really need to worry about. And as long as you have a plan for what to do when layoffs hit, don't worry. There's still plenty of jobs for people in tech. Unfortunately, the news is not so good for roles that are in HR, recruiting, marketing. Any administrative support staff are in just terrible positions right now. Companies are looking for ways to reduce staff without impacting customers. If you're not hiring as many people, you don't need HR and recruiting. If you're not spending as much on advertising, you don't need as many marketers. If you lay off those people, now your support staff for all of those people aren't necessary. And so there is this sort of trickle down where people at the top get fired and then several people under them or several people supporting those departments are going to go as well. So like I said, if you're in tech and you're not in one of those IT type support roles or help desk support roles, you're usually pretty good. But if you're a marketing analyst and all of a sudden the marketing team is cut in half, it's very likely that your organization isn't going to need as many people either. So there may be these secondary effects that you have to watch out for. Watch out for how inflation impacts your company. If costs are rising or if consumers are spending less, businesses are spending less on your products because they have to spend money elsewhere. Due to innovation, these secondary effects will very quickly hit your company as well. When you think about that discretionary spending, think about where else will that hit? Things like freight, where FedEx laid off because their freight business has dropped. Why? Because those companies that they rely on to do shipping, to do freight shipping, aren't doing as much. So any of these are now going to come into play over the next 3 to 6 months, some starting right now, where the effects of companies slowing down business, slowing down hiring, or even laying off in March through now are hitting those secondary businesses that are dependent upon those companies. So if you think of anybody that supplies to big tech companies, if they are the majority of your customer base, you're going to see a reduction in the amount of money that they spend. That will mean cutbacks. Now, revenue can be rising in your business, and you think, wow, I'm good, I'm safe. You're not if margins are dropping. So this is profitability. You can make the same amount of money now, and with inflation, if your cost structure is rising, you can become unprofitable, or your margins can be compressed. Investors don't like that, and so companies will respond to lower margins by laying off people. These are the things to really watch out for. And automation is going to be another trend that drives workforce reduction. When you think about efficiency, companies who are just saying, look, we have to run more efficiently because we're not getting as much money coming through the door anymore. We must remain viable. We have to use automation. That's going to be great for software companies. You will see growth areas in technology. Any B2B, business to business, enterprise software, especially targeting workforce productivity, workforce automation, or augmentation, those are going to do amazingly well. So if you're in one of those companies supporting a core line of business, you're probably in an excellent place to ride out this recession. But if your role is one that can be impacted by automation, if there are software products out there that will supplement staff, shall we say, so that companies can run with fewer people. If you see your company start to evaluate those types of software products, you are probably targeted for a layoff. So that's getting a little bit more specific and a little bit more granular into why companies are doing layoffs right now, why they're so significant, what companies are getting hit, what companies are going to get hit by the secondary impacts. Let me know if this was valuable. It seems like layoff videos are something that's popular right now, and these explainers are doing really well. But I want to know, use your likes, use your comments. Tell me if this is information that you need, but also ask me questions. What else do you want to know? I've been on the C-level side of businesses for a little over a decade now, so I have some good insights across industries that I can share with you about layoffs, about cost reductions, about these economic impacts. But if you don't ask me questions, I'm left to guess about what you're interested in. Don't do that. Get the best out of me. I'm going to share my knowledge. Might as well be something you're interested in.